Welcome to our share, Parashat Vayishlach, Tov Shin Pei Aleph, and we're moving along in Sefer Bereshis. Baruch Hashem, we now are meeting up with Yaakov, is about to meet Esav, and he's getting ready for the big encounter. And during the night, he crosses the Mavra Yabok, and he meets a man who we know is the Sarah Shel Esav. And the pasuk says, "Vayivaser Yaakov levado ve'yavik ish imay." And the man contended with him, as they translated, Ada loisa shacher. Vayar ki lo yachalo, vayiga bekaf yirecho, vatika kaf yerech Yaakov be'avki imay. And he struggled with him the entire night. And Chazal say, what was the struggle? What were they struggling about? So there are two days in Chazal. And one of the two shitas is that he was nidma like a Talmid Chacham. That he was there and he was trying to sort of, let's put it this way, be Makarav Yaakov in the wrong direction. He's telling him, you don't have to be so frum, you don't have to do things like this. And Yaakov withstood every temptation. Yaakov withstood everything that Esav threw at him, whether he be a Talmid Chacham or Fakert. And Yaakov prevailed. And he got a bracha from him. And Yaakov stayed who he was, and successfully met Esav in Lamaisa on the next day. So I was thinking to continue what we spoke about last week. Last week we talked about the fact that the imahos wanted to have their children, and they had in mind they should make a Kiddush Hashem. That the tachlis of their life would be Kiddush Hashem. And we spoke about how Leah had a child who made a Kiddush Hashem, Yehuda. And Rachel had children who made Kiddush Hashem, Yosef ben Yamin. How's that? The Kiddush Hashem of Leah's child Yehuda with Tamar was Befar Hesya, was out in the open. Everybody saw it. And Rachel, she had two children. One was B'tzina, which was Yosef with the mice of Eshes Potiphar. And one was Befar Hesya, was Binyamin, when it says the Shev Binyamin went into the Yamsuf. And therefore we see that there was a Kiddush Hashem on both sides. And that's what they made their children. Kiddush Hashem Befar Hesya, and Kiddush Hashem B'tzina, and Befar Hesya through Yosef and Yom. And we spoke about that at length. But I was thinking when I read this week's Parsha, and I read about Yaakov, so I realize that this Nakuda of the capability and the ability to make a Kiddush Hashem was in the previous generation as well. It came out from the Avos HaKadoshim. It didn't start with the... Avram Avinu was famous for making a Kiddush Hashem B'Rabim. When he had his kitchen, his soup tent, and he took the Arabs and he fed them, and everybody knew far and wide Avram Avinu is the man who takes care of people. Kiddush Hashem B'Rabim. But Yaakov, it tells us, Vayivaser Yaakov levadoi. Yaakov now had the question, will he make Kiddush Shem Shemayim B'tzina when no one else is around? And that's a very hard Kiddush Hashem. When the person's by himself, and Yaakov Avinu did that. It's interesting, the word levado, when he sent the Adarim, it all says Eider levado. He sent the same nusach levado. Each Eider was by itself. There was less, because each Eider was by itself, there wasn't hashpah that comes from being barabim. When a person is by himself, he is on his own resources. He doesn't have the hashpah of other people. He doesn't have the peer pressure of other people. He doesn't have the social pressures of other people. He really is who he is. And that's what Yaakov shined. Yaakov showed that even though he was levada, he was by himself, there was nobody to make a difference in him, Yaakov was able to turn the tide and win against the Sarah Shel Esav. So we learn this lesson of Kiddush Hashem continues on into this time that we're here now. I'd like to share that this past Shabbos was the, actually not Shabbos, Thursday night, Motzai Shabbos was the Agudah convention. And there were so many drashas with such important things to learn. And they made a Rosh Hashanah. Some of them, Mamish made a tremendous Rosh. I'd like to share some of that with you. But it's a lot. So I'll share a little bit this week, in Mitzvah Hashem, and we'll continue next week. We'll share some more. Today I'd like to share with you a few of the ideas from Harav Chaim, Aryeh Zev Ginsburg Shlita, and somebody who's a very chashuv Rav in Cedarhurst, and he was unfortunately sick with COVID, He was in the hospital for 6.5 weeks, 3 of them in a coma. And he, Baruch Hashem, Nisav and Niflos, he came out. And we asked him to reflect on that tekufa that he was there, and how it was, how we should go to understand and thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu if we had the COVID, if we didn't, how we were saved and how we should go to it. And he mentioned that in Kelm, there's a thing called a Kelbana Hisiris. They used to talk about a cow's Hisiris. The Hisiris of a cow. What's the Hisiris of a cow? He says if you drive along the highway, especially where I come from the Midwest, so you always see cows grazing on the side of the road, very placid. So he says, the cow is grazing on the side over there, he's eating his grass, his head is down, because a cow's an animal's head goes down, he's looking down, he's eating. And and all of a sudden, an 18-wheeler comes flying down the highway and blows a tire. And there's an enormous bang, the trailer, it goes off the side of the road, there's a huge crash, and it's unbelievable. What do? People go running over, can I help? Can I be there? There's a Hisiris, they're in the Hisiris. Wow, look what happened. What does the cow do? The cow looks up for a second and he sees what's going on, and then he puts his head back down and he starts to graze again. Doesn't bother like he was Gornished. It doesn't trouble him. He's back to eating his grass. He says, Das Zakten Kelb, Das is the Kalben Hisiris. And he says, that's the thing that we have to be most careful about. We go through Hisiris, things happen, as Rabbi Hashem does things for us. And he helps us. And sometimes he saves us. And we go back and we're just like the cow. It doesn't do anything for us. It doesn't go anywhere. So he said an amazing story about Reb Brevda, one of the great Bali Musar during the Reish of Shlomo Brevda. And he tells a story that happened in 1948 during the war in Eretz Yisrael, and he was a teenager at that time. And he was walking through the streets of Yerushalayim, and he was going to visit some relatives, or he was going somewhere, it seems. And in those days, there were many blackouts because they were afraid of the bombing, so he used to black out the city. And he's walking along, and everything is, obviously he's not happy, but he's, you could see where you're going, and going to doorways, dodge bullet, whatever. And all of a sudden, there's a blackout. And it's very dark, and he doesn't know where he's going. But he says, I remember the way well enough that I should be able to make it there, I should be able to get there. And he goes along his way, and he comes, and he starts walking anyway, and everything is fine. And then he comes to a place where he says, I'm not sure. He remembered that along the way to where he was going was a deep cliff. At a certain point, there was like a drop-off, and chas v'sholom, if you walk past there and you fall over that edge, that'll be the last thing, chas v'sholom, in a person's life. It could be deadly. And he got a little nervous, and he wasn't sure what to do. And he said, something, I'm a little scared. I think I'm going to stop right here. Maybe I'll go back. I don't know what to do. At that moment, the lights went on. And when the lights went on and he looked down, he saw beneath his feet that he had 1 foot right next to the chasm, right next to the abyss. And he almost fell into it. And Chazdei Hashem Noiraos, he did not fall in. And he's thinking, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thank you Hashem. Mom's one more step in disaster. And he went home. And the next day, he went to davening, and he davened, and he saw it's a regular davening. And obviously, even as a teenager, he was a Bal Musar, and it bothered him greatly. Why am I not feeling anything? I should be going crazy with thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I should be dunking the Vayishlach. And here I am, garnished. I'm sitting here, and I'm very happy with, regular davening. So it bothered him so much that he decided he's going to go to ask the Chazon Ish. Now in those days, to get from Yerushalayim to Bnei Brak was not like today. You didn't get in the 400 bus and you were there in 45 minutes. It was a 4-hour ride. You had to go from here, to there, whatever. So he traveled, he said it's worth it, he comes to the Chazon Ish. And he says to the Chazon Ish, what happened to me? HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved my life. He saved me. And now, boop, garnished. So Chazon Ish thinks about it and he says, you know something? There's a special Yetzer Hara in the Welt that makes sure that people should not have a curse of toiv when HaKadosh Baruch Hu does a nace for them. There's a special Yetzer Hara, that's that malach, that when it happens, the Yisrael disappears. As great as it was, it doesn't last because there's a special Yetzer Hara. How scary a thought that is. How frightening it is. I felt it myself. I was in a car accident a number of weeks ago. I was a passenger in the back seat. Baruch Hashem, was a mild car accident. Just somebody crashed in on the 495 to our car that I was in. And okay, I was very grateful at that point to the Rabbi Shalom. But I felt that same lack of his service. Thank you, Rabbi Shalom. I'm so grateful. Thank you. Next, and I didn't add a shaila. Should I bench Gaimel? Should not bench Gaimel? And then time went on, and so in the Sparda Chavel, whether I should or shouldn't. And after a certain point, it's halachically shaila. Can you bench Gaimel? Not bench Gaimel? But his service disappears, and you wonder why. And the answer is HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a Yetzer Hara to make it disappear. The story tells with Rav Victor Miller that there was a Yid, one of his Spaulim, was going to London to make a big business deal that would mamish make his fortune. And he said goodbye to Rav Victor Miller in the morning, and he said, I'm going to have a flight this afternoon, and I'll be back next week. He shows up by Mariv. Rav Victor Miller says, whoa, what are you doing here? He says, I missed the plane. See, I'm very upset. I had to cancel all my appointments. I'm so upset. My parnasa. So he says, let me ask you a question. Had you found out that that plane crashed and everybody was killed, and because of that you weren't on the plane, would you have been happy then? Says Rabbi, happy? I would have made the biggest kiddush and shul you've ever seen. I'd be so happy. I'd be so nispoil. So Rav Victor Miller turns and goes, that's vicious. 450 people have to die before you thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for saving you? You have to realize when HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves you, you have to think about it. You have to change your life. You have to be a different person. You can't just go ahead. You have to fight that Yetzer Hara that tells you not to have a service, to have a service. So Dr. Ginsburg, as much as this happened, as much as all the people went through it, to keep that Hisayrus is nishpashit. To keep that Hisayrus, because the Yetzer Hara fights that Hisayrus, because it knows that Hisayrus is a very powerful thing in Avodas Hashem. He said, but that is for people who had COVID and survived the COVID. What about people who didn't have the COVID? He says, they also have to be thankful. And it's also a nace. We think of a nace, the halachas in bench and gaimel, is that if Rahman a person's in a car accident, he benches gaimel. If he misses it by that much, he doesn't bench gaimel. So you think, because it's not such a, if the two cars miss each other, right? The guy cuts you off, and you slam on the brakes, and you're 2 inches away, Baruch Hashem, nothing happens, right? The ABS kicks in, whatever. And you think, okay. No, he said of Valtik Araya that it's a nace, and I bet most people don't even realize it. And it's a Beferish Mishnah in Pirkei Avos Perikei. It says, Asara Nisim Nasa Lavaseinu Bebeis HaMikdash. 10 Nisim were done to our fathers in the Beis HaMikdash. Well, it says Nisim, right? So what would you say the nace is? Oh, I don't know. If I would say, well, the menorah burned all night, and chveis, no. Here's the 10 Nisim. Lo ipila isha mireg basar HaKodesh. No woman ever miscarried from the basar HaKodesh. V'lo hisriach basar HaKodesh mi'olam. And the basar HaKodesh never was masriach, it never spoiled, never gave off a bad smell. V'lo nira zvuv b'beis HaMikdash. B'beis HaMikdash. And there was no flies in the slaughterhouse. If you've ever been to a slaughterhouse, flies are very common. To have no flies, no fly zone. Forgive me. It's a v'lo ira keri kain gadol b'yom kippur, and there was no kera. V'loi, and this next nace. V'lo kibu agshamim eishel atzi amarach, and the rain did not wash it out. v'loi nitzu haruach, and the ruach didn't blow. And then one thing that people didn't feel gekvetched. Every other thing, Asara Nisim, 9 out of 10, something that didn't happen. Something that didn't happen. Can you imagine? Das ist Eichad HaNeis. People think of a Neis as something that did happen. Zok Beferish and a Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, something that didn't happen is also a Neis. So he said, if you didn't get COVID, you have to have more gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even more. Das ist Eichad HaNeis. She'asali Neis b'makam hazeh. I was home and I didn't get it. It's Eichad HaNeis. And that's something we have to be grateful for. So these are all the things that he said. He talked about the Yetzer Hara against this iris, and he talked about the fact that not getting it is just as big a nace as getting it and surviving it. And we have to be grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what do? How do we remember? How do we have nisim are happening to us b'chol yom? Nisim that we got it, nisim we didn't get it. How do we deal with it? Yaakov leads the way. Because you take a look, and people sort of end the story of Yaakov when he wins against the Malach, and everybody's happy and we all go home. But if you keep going in the Psukim, in Mitzvah Hashem, you'll take a look. If you get Shlishi, the Shabbos, you'll really pay attention now. It says, Vayikra Yaakov, what happens afterwards? It says, Vayishal Yaakov in Pasuk base. It says, Vayishal Yaakov Vayomer, Hagida no Shmecha, tell me your name. Vayomer Lama Zatishal Lishmi. Vayivarcha Yisai Shom. He gives them a bracha. I'm sorry, Pasuk Lamed. Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Vayikra Yaakov Shem HaMakam Pniel. Ki Ra'isi Elokim Ponim El Ponim Vatinotzel Nashi. And Yaakov called that Makam Pniel. He changed the name of the place. I don't know if the people lived there all accepted the name change. But to Yaakov, it's now called Pniel because he saw the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every time he walked past there, he said, ooh, Asali Neis B'Makam Hazeh. And Hashem saved me. Elokim Ponim El Ponim V'Notzel Nashi. So Yaakov showed us the way. We have to make a place. We have to make a city. We have to call it on the name of our days. So we have from now on, every time we pass our house, we say, that's where I got COVID and I recovered, or that's where I didn't get COVID, and to cause the Hashem. Whichever way it goes, we have to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's what Yaakov taught us. So we see in our parsha, we see from Yaakov, we learn tremendous things. We learn that Vayishlach Yaakov Levadai. Yaakov was by himself, and he made the same Kiddush Hashem that he would have made Barabim. He didn't change inside. It wasn't because he was inside, he didn't daven anymore, and he didn't make brachos anymore, he did whatever he did it, because he wasn't there. No, it was something that he did publicly. He did privately. It was all the Zel Bezach. Das is Yaakov Avinu, and that's something we all learn from. So as we go into Shabbos, we should learn from these wonderful attitudes and these wonderful deeds of our Avos, and we learned from the Shvatim last week, and we learned from the Avos this week. The Eibush Zalhofen that we can follow in their ways, making Kiddush Hashem Barabim, making Kiddush Hashem the Tzina, and always following and remembering all the Nisim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does us for us, B'chol Yom, U'B'chol Eis, U'B'chol Shah. Again, Shabbos.